This is Dennis Sam on the next series of Success Talks, and I'm now here with Tunde Bello. Tunde, thank you very much for your time today. Would you care to share a bit more with the audience about your journey, where you've come from, your background, and where you see yourself going?
Right, thanks Dennis, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you and all of your listeners. My journey, where did I come from? Well, basically I was born in Hammersmith, Shepherd's Bush really, West London, of Nigerian parents, and essentially I went to a comprehensive school just opposite, close to White City Estates, near QPR ground. It was called Christopher Wren at the time. Now I think it's called Phoenix Institute. But it was a regular comprehensive school, and I kind of basically, while I was there, kind of developed an interest in sciences. My father and my mother from Nigeria, when they came over, my father was really a key kind of inspirational person in my life, as was my mother, because he was essentially the second black osteopath in Britain. So basically when he came over in the 60s, he kind of qualified as an osteopath, and he was only the second one, and he spent time at the British School of Osteopathy. And so I kind of at an early age was instilled with that understanding that, Africans and Nigerians and black people could be as good, or if not better, than anyone else, and that was a message that was continually rammed home, as it were. And my mother was by background a school teacher, so she spent a lot of time kind of drilling me in a traditional Nigerian style, which I sometimes didn't appreciate, the basics of maths, reading, arithmetic, etc. So that was my background. Went to school, didn't necessarily fully apply myself, but kind of did okay, but had a very strong interest in the biological sciences and chemistry, and so decided to take my O-levels in predominantly in those subjects, and did reasonably well. There was an interesting story actually around my, and again maybe a pivotal story around my ability to actually follow a scientific career, and that involves my father, because at one stage I was getting ready to take my mock exams, my O-level mock exams, and I'd taken them and I'd actually passed them, and however my chemistry teacher was making the case that I should do a CSE instead of the O-level. These are before GCSE, so the older folks in your audience might remember all of these different categories, but CSE was a bit of a lower category than an O-level. And so this chemistry teacher was saying, okay, we think Tunde should do a CSE. And my father said, well, he looked at my mock exam results, he said, well, you passed and you were qualified to do an O-level. So he decided to go up the school and talk to this chemistry teacher, and they had an in and out, a little bit of a Barney about it, and he was basically, the guy was saying, I don't think Tunde has the ability to do O-level chemistry, and my father said, well, he passed the exam, so why don't you? So this went on, and eventually the chemistry teacher decided to kind of give up, but I could tell he wasn't pleased about it. So consequently, for the rest of that term, up until the time I had my exams, he was kind of ribbing me in class, saying, oh, Tunde's father knows better, that's what Tunde's doing. So he kind of really put the spotlight on me. But to make a long story short, ultimately I kind of got a top grade in chemistry and kind of really shut him up. And that was a kind of a formative lesson for me, because, being a youngster at that stage, when your teacher tells you they don't think you can do something, you think, oh, they're my teacher, they know me. And then my dad is telling me something else, and you're a little bit embarrassed about it. But it was a case of, okay, maybe you should have a bit more faith in your own abilities, and if you have kind of achieved something and you can, and you've shown the aptitude, pursue it and don't let anything get in your way. But that was a very formative and very important pivotal point, because otherwise maybe I wouldn't have gone on to do my A-levels and then get the grades that I needed to kind of go forward and actually start a BSc degree down in Portsmouth, and that was in Portsmouth Polytechnic at the time, now Portsmouth University, in biomedical sciences and medical laboratory sciences. And that was interesting. I chose kind of Portsmouth because I wanted to get away from home a little bit, and also it was by the sea, and for some reason someone from a higher year had told me about Portsmouth, told me it was a great place, so I decided I would try it out. So I did my BSc degree down in Portsmouth, and that was a great experience. Met a lot of great people. It was an interesting time to go to university down there because there weren't many people of colour down there. There was a kind of a budding African, Afro-Caribbean society, and it was one of those places where if you walked down the road, you saw another black person, you kind of definitely said hi, and you became instant friends because there weren't many of us. And sometimes it was a hostile environment. This was the time where there were lots of skinheads, the National Front, etc. were kind of, going around and making a lot of noise, and really kind of, it was a bit unsettling. By no means what our parents and, had gone through when they first came to the UK, but definitely an unsettling time, and a time that you needed, the companionship of your friends. So it was that was an interesting time. But finished my BSc, and then decided, okay, I'm going to get a job, and I got a job back in London, up in Hampstead at the Royal Free Hospital in the biochemistry and the clinical pathology labs. So I was doing biochemical testing, using the big autoanalyzers, running tests on blood for all patients that come in to kind of help diagnose their condition and also monitor their recoveries. Did that for a couple of years, and then there was a pivotal point where I could make a decision around what was my next career move in terms of could I do a more professional based kind of qualification that would keep me on the medical laboratory scientist track, or could I open up my horizons by doing a master's, which would also allow me to follow those professional qualifications in medical laboratory sciences, but also potentially open up some other avenues. So I selected a master's in instrumentation and analytical sciences because I found that quite interesting, because I was working on autoanalyzers and worked on instrumentation and wanted to kind of know a little bit more about it. And that was up at UMIST, University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, and I think it's now been melded into the University of Manchester. And I did that master's up there, and that was a great experience as well. Met again more people. Went up to the north, hadn't been up there before. A different type of social scene, but very interesting. And I also kind of was doing athletics at the time, so I kind of got adopted by Sale Harriers because I used to run down in the south for Thames Valley Harriers, and so had a great time there. Got my master's, and then got my first job after my master's. Got my first job in the pharmaceutical industry in a discovery drug development group that was based in Dagenham, East London, and this was a French company that had bought an old established UK company, and hence they had a subsidiary in East London. And I worked with that company as a bioanalytical scientist for a number of years before I kind of again wondered what opportunities could be open to me, because I saw the restrictions that my qualifications had, because I was looking around the organization and saying, okay, how do you get to a point where you're one of the decision makers and not just one of the people doing? And I noticed that all of the decision makers had, and the group heads and the department heads were PhDs. And so I realized maybe I need to go away and do a PhD. Then I kind of basically put together, I suppose, a loose strategy to try and get my company to sponsor my PhD. And that kind of really was kind of unbeknownst to myself, my first, I suppose, instance of working out a network, talking to people within the organization, developing relationships. And ultimately it was quite interesting. I think I put the fact that the company ultimately sponsored my PhD at King's College down to the fact that I had a very good relationship with the head of the site at Rempling Aurora and Mayor Baker in Dagenham, and all the folks that had to approve my PhD were scared of him, and so they kind of basically, essentially, kind of he made the path easier for me to do my PhD at King's. So I did a PhD at King's in pharmaceutical sciences, and it was actually a very, I think the experience was great because it was relatively easy, a lot easier than maybe other people kind of going straight from their first degree or second degree without kind of having work experience to kind of go straight to a PhD. Because I had work experience, I had applied the techniques and the science that others had not in actual work environment, and I had a more organized thought process and was able to kind of work through my PhD relatively quickly. So I finished my PhD, and it was interesting because I felt very fortunate because I had actually managed to secure this PhD sponsorship without the requirement for me to return to the company for any period of time. So I could basically, after my PhD, I was free to go. But my ex-boss at the time saw I was finishing my PhD and came up and approached me and said, okay, do you want to come back as a team leader within my organization? We really like you, and if you would, that would be great. At the same time, I had an opportunity to join another company because my PhD supervisor at the time, who was the head of the School of Pharmacy at King's, basically had a colleague or friend who was looking for someone with my skill set to go to Italy to work for a small Italian pharmaceutical company just outside Venice. I think it's Padova. So they flew me outside, and so I was like, I was in kind of riches in terms of potential jobs. So the Italian company flew me to Italy, and I kind of they showed me around, wined and dined me for a couple of days, and then kind of offered me a position. And my old company again offered me a position, and ultimately I took the position with my old company based on the potential for growth and the security in terms of the job that they offered, because the Italian company offered a contract. Although it was in beautiful Padova, wonderful valleys, wonderful Italian food, lovely sunshine, it was a contractual basis, 2-year contract to be renewed, and it wasn't secure, and plus I wouldn't be leading a team. So it seemed to me like, unfortunately it was a choice between sunny Padova and sunny Dagenham, and I chose sunny Dagenham. So I moved back to, well, I didn't move back to Dagenham. I was working in Dagenham, but I used to live in Chelsea. So I lived in Chelsea because I couldn't live in Dagenham. So I used to get the district line all the way to Dagenham every day. It used to be a 1.5 hour each way journey, and 3-hour trip to Dagenham for maybe another 3 years before I was approached by a recruiter who asked me if I would be interested in joining an American company, and so I was doing quite well at Rempel & Rohrer, a decent sized team doing discovery, drug development work, and so I kind of thought, okay, I'll have a look and see what it's about. And so I went to this kind of interview with the head of this group who had flown over from the US to kind of select a few people that they were going to take back to the US to kind of interview further. And ultimately he seemed to like me, and his colleagues seemed to like me, and basically they invited me to the US for interviews. And so a couple of weeks later I flew over to the US with my fiance at the time, because we were thinking of getting married, and we were actually thinking of buying an apartment in Putney at the time. It was very strange, but we kind of put those things on hold and said, well, what's the harm in looking? And so we were flown to the US, underwent two rigorous days of interviewing in both in Princeton, New Jersey, as well as in Wallingford, Connecticut. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I was offered 2 positions, one in an area that I'd worked in previously, which was the discovery side of drug development, and one was a complete departure and maybe a further step along the drug development timeline, as it were, working in clinical development. So now you move from the preclinical, and I'm going to say preclinical, you move away from the in-test tube or the animal models, and you're working actually developing drugs in humans. So you move to the clinical testing stage of drug development. And that was, again, a new door opened up, completely unexpected, and another thing to kind of tweak my curiosity. So I decided to kind of follow the job in the clinical side. And so I joined Bristol Myers Squibb in 1998, left the UK with my fiancée, my soon-to-be wife, and we moved to sunny Pennsylvania. She got a job, she had a job at the time with GlaxoSmithKline, and so she was, she flew over as well. And she actually flew over a bit earlier than me because of complications around visas. But ultimately, I ended up staying with Bristol Myers Squibb for 5 years, working in a number of therapeutic areas, getting wonderful experience. It was really a baptism of fire because there was obviously the cultural adjustment, moving from the UK to the US, but also a job adjustment, doing a completely new job, learning the ins and outs of clinical development, much more kind of critical, much more important, much more, I suppose, scarier than the preclinical, because if you mess up on the clinical program, a person can get hurt or die, versus if you mess up on the preclinical, maybe a bunny rabbit or a test tube dies. So a very big difference. But kind of made that adjustment, was with Bristol Myers Squibb for 5 years before, again, and one of the wonderful things about the US is especially at the time that I went, it was a sea of opportunity. You got headhunters coming in all the time and basically offering you positions. And so, again, at Bristol Myers for a number of years, I was approached by someone, a colleague actually, that I'd worked with at Bristol Myers, and asked me whether I'd be interested in working for Pfizer. I was very comfortable in my position, but again, curiosity kind of got the better of me. I decided to go for the interview, and before I kind of actually went, it wasn't even an interview, it was kind of speculatively meeting the head of the group, who essentially at the end of our meeting said, well, can you start next week? And so that was the way I kind of ended up with Pfizer. But moved to Pfizer and basically have been there since 2003, have had a wonderful time there, but actually, again, broadening my horizons, working in the New York office, actually even understanding more than just the clinical development of the drugs, actually working through the development, approval of the drugs, working with our commercial colleagues to actually enhance the commercial value of the drugs, working with our medical affairs colleagues in terms of ensuring that the medical professionals know about our drugs and are able to provide input into us, working with business development colleagues to look at potential assets, not only within the company but outside of the company for developing partnerships. So, it's been a wonderful journey. I don't know if I had any strategies that you can extract from that long tail. I welcome you to.
What do you believe has been the key to your success, and what do you believe is the key to success in general?
I think the key to my success has been working in an area that I find interesting, that I can derive passion about. That's been a key. So you're doing something that you love, it's doing something that you like. The other key, I think, has been, unbeknownst to myself really, is an ability to kind of forge friendships and networks with folks, and again, this was even before I knew what a network and using a network was. So that has been critical. I cannot, no one, if anyone tells you they do anything on their own without help of others, that they're extremely arrogant and lying. Both of those things. So you need the help of others and the willingness of others to kind of help you, and that, I think, maybe part of that comes from having an open mind, being open to ideas, and having that open spirit that kind of possibly allows people to kind of forge those relationships with you and want to help you. The other, I think, is a certain level of stubbornness or tenacity. I wish I even had more of it, because I think that's an attribute of my father's, that is kind of basically, if you wanted to hear a wonderful story of kind of success, his is kind of, I think, in a lot of ways, even more compelling than mine. But his tenacity, his ability not to allow people and preconceptions to stop him from doing what he wants to do. Those, I think, are probably the key ones that I can think of.
What is failure in your opinion, and how have you handled that along your journey?
Failure. I mean, failure is an interesting one. I think failure I think failure is only failure if you make that psychological association in your head that it's a failure. And I think one of the things that I've heard is, and I've tried to adopt, but is that, you know, if something doesn't work out, that is actually not necessarily a failure, but it's an opportunity to understand and learn and to do something in a better way. I think we've all had setbacks, let's put it that way. And maybe I'm coming from America where they don't like extreme words like failure and problem, you know, they like to say issue and, you know, kind of, you know, things like that to soften. But I would say, you know, if you have, setbacks are kind of, you know, these things that kind of basically, you know, are challenges, and basically the other thing is, are you going to allow them to stop you from ultimately achieving your objective and goal? So do you go up, above and around through them, as our friend Piers might say. I think failure, it's one of those things as well, though, from the perspective of a black person within a very predominantly white industry in a white area in terms of science and clinical development. It's one, and as a person that has reached a relative position of prominence, it's one that kind of has an extra little burden, because you feel that if you fail, you're not failing just for yourself, but you're failing for your community and your people. So that can be another burden if you let it be. But it's a constant battle to kind of, you know, put that to the side and stop it from inhibiting you from doing what you need to do.
If you could talk to yourself when you were 15 and give yourself a piece of advice as to how to take your career further, accelerate you further, what would it be and why?
I would say, you know, pay attention, take it more seriously earlier. I mean, I was like, you know, I was lucky in that my parents were, you know, educated people and constantly pushing me, but I didn't necessarily want to be pushed, and you know, I was possibly a little bit lazy at times and lackadaisical and not really appreciating the opportunities that I had, and they clearly appreciated any opportunity they had. And I think it's one of those things that, you know, we all kind of encompass in our different environments. All things are relative. You're in a relative environment, so you kind of gauge yourself next to your friends and pals, not necessarily next to the world. So when you look at the world and you look at yourself and your environment, how much better off are you than most of the world? What opportunities do you have greater than the world, as opposed to, okay, looking at John next to you and thinking, wow, how did he get that so easily? You know, I'm going to be demoralized by that and kind of allow that to influence me. No, you're in a position, being in the UK, being in the US, you're one of the most privileged human beings on the planet, and you need to look at the rest of the human race and see how they're getting on to kind of really put that into perspective.
In terms of self-doubt, has anyone ever told you what you're doing is silly, crazy, or foolish, or you shouldn't do that on your journey?
I don't think I've ever had anyone kind of say that. I mean, there were kind of times maybe when I was, again, you know, a lot younger in secondary school, where, you know, I was kind of doing my, you know, book work, and my friends, you know, and other mates at school were kind of saying, okay, let's go and play football or something. Why do you spend so much time reading? Why do you spend so much time doing your book work? So they kind of were kind of, you know, oh yeah. And then there was this kind of, sometimes this little thing about, oh, kind of African kids always kind of in their books, you know, versus, you know, other folks. So, but nothing, you know, my friends were pretty positive really in the main, so nothing really awful, no.
In terms of hard work and motivation, obviously you're human and everyone goes through ups and downs. During the low periods, what have you done to pick yourself up, or what do you do to keep yourself going in those low times, right?
I think I'm kind of a pretty optimistic person, so overall I think things are going to work out, number one. Number two, I'm kind of one of these people, I mean, I'm always talking to my wife if anything goes wrong. Rule number one, I think it's from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Rule number one: don't panic. So, and, you know, I'm very slow to panic. Always thinking about, okay, this is an issue or problem. What do I do next? How do I get out of it? As opposed to wallowing and thinking, oh, woe is me, I'm done for, and such. So I've kind of usually adopt that attitude. So with an overall spirit of optimism and an approach to kind of applying myself to solving the issue or the problem, that's been my general approach.
Procrastination. How have you dealt with that along your journey?
That's an everlasting battle, and I think, you know, it's part of the human condition. I mean, I think we all have it to a certain extent, and you know, I'm really jealous of people that can, you know, defeat it completely. I kind of have it as well, and it's basically one of those things that, in a way, I suppose it's being aware that it's a part of your personality, and basically. Through awareness, actually acting on the awareness. So when I'm comfortably knowing in the background that I'm kind of something's that I should be doing, it constantly nags me until I do it, and then I do it, I feel a whole lot better. So it's like one of those kind of you know, niggling pains that until you've addressed it, you know, it's going to constantly be there, kind of nagging at your conscience. And I like having a clear conscience. So it's one of those things that, although you know, I'm human and there's so many things, and unfortunately, you know, sometimes a lot of things stack up because you commit to so many things, and it's often not procrastination, but maybe you've overloaded yourself and overwhelmed yourself, and so then there's time to kind of, okay, take a minute back and kind of reorganize your work and move forward.
Pressure. How do you deal with it, and what have been your most pressurized situations along the way?
Pressure. I think you know, life is full of pressure. I mean, you know, we get pressured when we have our first exams, or we're doing our first recitals as kids, or we're up in front of an audience. And then, you know, it continues. I think I'll give you maybe an instance of my one of the instances of pressure that I kind of felt was when I initially moved to the US, and I was changing jobs, moving from the preclinical to the clinical arena. And I had a project where I had to basically abstract over a couple of hundred reports from a Japanese development colleague. Fortunately, I didn't have to translate them into Japanese, from Japanese to English, but I did have to kind of rewrite them, reorder them in order to make a submission package. And that was the first job I was given when I arrived from the UK, and I'd never seen a report of that nature before, and it was an overwhelming task initially. And I remember my boss asked me to provide the first package of maybe 4 or 5 reports so that he could look over them, and he was extremely disappointed with my first efforts. And so you can imagine I kind of like was working 24-hour days really almost to try and get this thing done. My first package was not very well received. I've just moved over from England. I'm thinking, oh crap, I've made a real big mistake here. So, but you know, again, perseverance. You know, ultimately at the end of the day, you know, you know, it's a case of no one's going to kill you about it. You know, unless you're in a present situation where you are going to get killed, then maybe you should kind of tone your kind of, you know, your concern about it down a little bit, kind of take a calming breath and kind of work out again from a problem solving perspective, how do I move forward? So again, that's probably one of the highest pressure kind of situations I've been in.
Final question. Imagine in 40 or 50 years time you're looking back over your life. What would you want to have achieved from this point onwards, and what would you want your legacy to have been?
That's a hard one. It's a good question. I mean, I don't know if I spend a lot of time thinking about my legacy, because I spend now I've had the privilege of working in the pharmaceutical industry, and I've worked on a number of products that actually have made it to the market and actually have been helping people. So I've worked on a number of drugs that actually have been helping extend, enhance human life, so that to me is a great achievement. A lot of people within our industry work their whole careers without actually working on one product that makes it to the marketplace. I've worked on several. The moving forward, as I kind of hit maybe the middle to end part of my career, I would like to continue to have that experience, because now I think a friend of mine says you tasted the good stuff, so you don't want to go back. So I want to kind of continue to work on things that have true impact, have true meaning, have true worth to society, in terms of, okay, if I'm working on a project or program or product, I want that product and program to move forward and ultimately deliver something that's useful and can actually help people. So, and also I want to kind of be stretched. I want to kind of continually learn. I love learning. It's like, people, you know, it's a cliche, learning is a lifelong endeavor. It's not a cliche, it's true. If you meet anyone really that's kind of, you know, really worked well in their field, they are continually learning, and they love to learn, and they love to learn every day. So that's, you know, and so, you know, I suppose if I come to the end of my life and I have done all those things and haven't spent a lot of time not doing things that I think are fruitful and worthwhile, and again, you know, above and beyond that, I think I should put my family, you know, having two wonderful daughters and a wonderful wife, and making sure that they have happy and fulfilled lives, and have, you know, at least as many opportunities, if not more opportunities than I've had. I will look back on life and think it was well spent.